for a new TVR. Subaru's latest legacy and an exclusive crash test of the most dangerous cars you can buy.
Look, I'm sorry. It's not you, it's me. I just don't know how to handle your boisterousness. You're so loud and I don't know what you're going to do next. One minute we're having a fabulous time and the next you just let me down. I just don't know how to cope. I'm not saying we didn't have any great times. And I'll never ever forget you.
If living is without you.
But there's no easy way to say this. I'm leaving you. And yes, before you ask, there is a new love in my life.
And here is the handsome brute. TVR's wild child Cerberus has got a new younger brother, the Speed 6. And whilst it shares the same head-turning good looks as its sibling, underneath these gorgeous curves lies a new heart.
A 4-litre, 350 brake horsepower straight 6. It is only TVR's second all-new engine and is aimed at those who find the range-topping 4.5-litre 420 brake V8 a bit too roughy-tufty. My new Steed may be marginally slower off the mark, but it still needs only 4.4 seconds to hit 60. But it will match my old Flame's top speed of 160 miles an hour.
But the biggest difference is refinement. It is a little more, how shall we say, manageable. The noise, predictably, isn't as in your face, but it still has a pretty good voice.
To give it a more gentlemanly manner, its suspension is softer for a smoother ride, but the handling has not been sacrificed. It will still do the business if you fancy a bit of hooliganism, sliding its tail when induced. The heavily weighted power steering gives a reassuring feel when this happens, though. It is the most mature and conservative of the Cerberus range, but it still manages to combine sauciness with sophistication.
And that smoothness has certainly been reflected inside, including the James Bond-style controls, which look fabulous, but give you absolutely no clues as to what they do. These operate the electric windows, the hazards are somewhere in here, and this little button lets you out. The Speed 6 is fitted with the same perfectly designed steering wheel as its bigger brother, though it needs a little longer to turn from lock to lock. The indicator noise is similar to that of an HGV truck in reverse, though fortunately you can have it turned down at your local dealer. And because the Speed 6 shares the same gearbox as the V8, to avoid that, you have to move towards fifth before engaging reverse.
An idiosyncrasy both cars could do without. In town, the softer suspension means you don't feel every single road imperfection or tram line, which is no bad thing as the V8 tends to jolt over every one. Any challenges at traffic lights are oh so easily won. The 6-cylinder engine has plenty of torque and is flexible enough for you to potter along the promenade in 3rd or 4th gear. This is a motor which manages to make you feel a little special. It's British, a sports car, and it's beautiful. On the whole, the £41,100 Speed 6 is not radically different from its more expensive bigger brother. They both look great and make a decent amount of noise, but, well, maybe I do miss the rough and readiness of the old V8. He's still available. Oh, I just don't know.
But why does a girl have to choose when she can have both?
Look, I didn't really mean what I said last night. I could have been a bit hasty. I've really missed you. Fancy a threesome?
If the passenger in this Ford Probe had been flesh and blood and not a test dummy, he'd be dead. Because this is no ordinary probe. This is two halves of two different cars clumsily stitched together. It's what's known as a cut and shut, a death trap by any other name.
And here's the thing. If you inadvertently buy a cut and shut, we're not just talking about losing money, we are talking about losing life. Because cars that have been welded down the middle offer all the crash protection of rice paper.
The deformation is so significant that it would now have failed the American safety test. It has not performed to the way that it was designed, and all the structural integrity of the vehicle has been totally compromised.
Now, what about our friend the dummy in there?
Well, they've been wired up to a computer, and from the evidence now presented, the thoracic and abdominal injuries of the dummy is approximately 60% greater.
So, normal Ford probe, 30 miles an hour, passenger in this situation could walk away. In this cut and shut, he's dead.
It is my opinion that the passenger in this car would not have survived this impact.
So, empirical proof, cut and shuts are killers.
Cut and shuts indeed can be killers.
Up on the ramp, you can see the join, a line of brittle welds that would have torn apart. And if the impact had been 60 miles an hour, not 30, this probe would have split in two.
Now, if you think there are just a few hundred cut and shuts in the system, think again. Every year, 80,000 badly damaged cars are put back onto the road. We got this one from Essex Trading Standards, who found it on a forecourt with 8995 on the screen. But here's the bit that will make you slack-jawed in amazement. It is not illegal to rebuild a badly damaged write-off. It's not illegal to sell one, and you don't even have to tell the buyer that it's not one car, but two welded together. And that, I'm sure you'll agree, is a national scandal.
You start off with a car, say from a scrapyard or an insurance write-off. You get dodgy MOTs, tax, everything, so it's untraceable. You then take it to your workshop, cut it, weld it back together, advertise it in the local paper, and you've got a mobile phone. They phone you up, you take it to the house, sell it, and you're off. Simple as.
And what sort of cars are you producing, if that's the right word, at the end of the day?
Death traps, I suppose. Total death traps. But you don't think of that.
Doesn't bother you?
No, not at all. Not at all. If you're meant to go, you're meant to go, ain't you?
But you're helping them to go.
Yeah, I don't have no scruples about it. I haven't got no worries about that.
And we've got hold of another cut and shut. This superficially shiny 93 BM 325i Coupe is not one car, but two welded together. The front half is from a stolen motor, and the back half is from another BM Coupe that was front-ended. We got this from Merseyside Stolen Vehicle Squad. You can tell. I looked at the roof first and I could see all these little production marks from wet and dry paper. That means the whole car's been resprayed. You have to ask yourself why. With written-off cars, always look at the roof. Also in here, there should be a rubber strip here, but there's not. But you can see red paint. That's because the front was red, the back is blue. Under the bonnet, same story. Lift it up and you can see on the suspension turret here that we've got red paint again. So, it's not a bad job. So what we're going to do with it is we're going to crash it.
Because it's in everybody's interest. These tests are the first time in the history of crash research that fully instrumented test dummies have been put in cut and shuts. What we're going to do now is fire a 1,000 kilogram sled broadside at 30 miles an hour to simulate a side impact.
All right, what sort of damage on this one?
Well, there's far greater intrusion than on the previous car that we looked at, and far, far greater than an uncut and shut BMW. Also, the distortion of the dash area is very, very disturbing. In fact, it's frightening, because the reason this has occurred is because this car is not only a cut and shut, but it is also a stolen vehicle, and it's had its identity changed by welding a new chassis plate into the front of the vehicle.
So what you're saying is because these mongrels have put in a new chassis plate, they have distorted and cut the bulkhead, which has reduced the structural integrity of the whole car.
Indeed. They have weakened it, the welds have failed, and in fact the plate has sheared across there. It's allowed the dash area to come across, the bulkhead to come across, and cause horrendous injuries to the occupants of the car.
Okay, let's talk about those occupants. Passenger in particular, how's he doing?
Not very well. Due to the internal organ damage, the readings that we have off the computer is that he sustained injuries as such 3 times greater than the normal one expected to survive with. If he had been the passenger in a normal 3 Series BMW coupe, he would have survived.
And before we get lulled into a sense of false security that these are just crash test dummies, cut and shuts kill real people.
Well, Gareth was my youngest son, and he was a first-year student at Manchester University. And a week after his 20th birthday, he was travelling in the back of a Renault 5 Turbo car, along with his flatmate and a friend of his flatmate who owned the car. The car hit a tree and completely broke in half. Gareth was thrown out and fractured his skull, and all 3 in fact died as a result of the accident. The coroner in fact suggested that they may have lived had the car been a single car and not 2 cars welded together. Because people are killed individually in 2s and 3s and 5s and in cars and other ways on the roads, nothing is done about it. The government in fact will not legislate, and I feel it's high time they did.
I know from my personal experience, I bought a Rover. I didn't discover till about 12 months later, it was a beautiful looking car, that in fact that the parts for the back end were different from the front end, and I then realised that the 2 parts had actually been put together. Now I think it's unacceptable, first of all, that the motorist is not aware that that has happened to 2 vehicles, which have been written off by the insurance companies. It's a practice I deplore, and I want to make sure that at least people know that when they come to buying a car, and that means I have to change an awful lot of information at the DVLA, and I've been talking to them about that. I think an awful lot needs to be done to improve the motorist's chances in this, and that's why I proposed about 5 or 6 years ago, and now I'm going to have a chance in government, to give a better deal for the motorist. We should know really what the real mileage is on a car. You're not even guaranteed about that. You should know its history, for example, of how many incidents or crashes it might be involved in, and certainly if it's 2 put together. And I think DVLA, which have the information and the computers, could put it together. I would like to see that written into our laws, and I'm working on and waiting a response from DVLA about this.
In the meantime, to protect yourself, always try to speak to the car's previous owner. They'll tell you if it's had a checkered past. And even HPI or AA used car data checks aren't infallible. The best defense is to have the car inspected by a qualified engineer. But you can make certain checks yourself. Look at the roof for signs of filler and new paint, and inside the engine and boot for overspray or colour changes. On the test drive, listen for wind noise from badly fitting doors and look for bits of trim that don't fit properly.
There's one word to describe the process of cut and shut, and that is, quite simply, murder. To knowingly sell a car that can kill. And there isn't a shred of legislation to protect the consumer. This is a national scandal, and it's gone on for long enough, which is why we need sweeping legislation, and we need it now.
If you want more information about how not to buy a cut and shut, call our special hotline number now. 0990 333 660. That's 0990 333 660. And we'll repeat that number at the end of the show.
I don't believe it. It can't be. It is. It is. A Suzuki SJ. This is very exciting. At last. Who would have thought it? Millions of years old and yet perfectly preserved. I wonder. Yes! Ha ha! Off-road, the SJ really was a tough little customer and proved itself the perfect tyre car for ham-fisted holidaymakers. But back home it was a different story. Hitting the motorway was truly a prehistoric experience. The old SJ had to evolve or face extinction. But evolution is a cruel game. A natural selection disposed of the Jurassic SJ for the same reasons that old T-Rex here was deemed surplus to requirements. Just think, 1 minute you're stalking the earth inspiring terror, the next you're a plastic giveaway in a box of crispy Choco Bran. Behold, the new Suzuki Jimny. A drunken baboon on a BMX has better on-road manners than the rough old SJ, so it's a good bet that the Jimny is more accomplished on tarmac. But has this new civility been won at the expense of off-road ability? Let's find out. Surely, you're saying, the cheeky little Jimny can't be a serious off-roader. It doesn't look nearly butch enough. Well, have another look, or better still, have a feel. And you'll discover that rather than fragile alloys, the Jimny comes equipped with sturdy steel wheels. That Barbie-esque colour-keyed bodywork is made from tough, bendy plastic with loads of give in it. There's hardly anything in the way of overhangs at either end, so there's nothing to get caught on rocks, tree roots, or any of the other lumpy stuff they have in the craggy old countryside. It weighs around a metric ton and has a powerful 1.3 litre 16-valve engine, so the Jimny is quite capable of hauling itself out of most situations. Basically, if you need to get somewhere the Jimny won't go, you need to have a word with Chris Bonington. I think we've established beyond any doubt that the Jimny absolutely adores the brown stuff. But what about the black stuff, which, let's face it, is where the majority of them will spend virtually all of their time? Well, there's good news and there's not so good news. Because it's a 4x4, you get to sit high up with a commanding view of traffic. There is predictably an enormous amount of headroom because that's the cheapest way of making small cars feel slightly less claustrophobic. And the dinky dimensions mean you'll be able to squeeze through gaps that bring everyone else grinding to a halt. And with a turning circle better than a black cab, parking is child's play. Inside, the furniture's arranged so you can either carry something very large and very square, or you can lie everything almost flat and you've got yourself a 4x4 with a 4-poster. Brings a whole new meaning to a dirty weekend. And now for the not so good news. Make any sort of decent progress in the Jimny and the steering goes awfully light and vague. It's not that the Jimny won't go around corners, it will, and with surprisingly little body roll for a car that's this tall and narrow. It's just that, well, it doesn't feel like it wants to. And then there's the ride. It felt as though I'd been strapped into one of those vibrating contraptions that they advertise on the shopping channel. Personally, I don't think that the corgi colour schemes and Postman Pack profile of the Jimny are really me. But if you like your four-wheel drives cheap and cheeky, then this one's a little cracker. Cheap? Certainly. You can have a Jimny in your drive for a fiver shy of 10 grand. Cheeky? Oh aye. Too cheeky by half if you ask me.
The 1998 Motor Show and Jaguar are hoping that classic British styling will sell well in America. But success is not always a certainty. After the war, GIs returning home left with a fondness for British sports cars like MG. The British virtually took over prestige American motor shows, and by the late 40s, 95% of all cars imported into the US were British built. And with the supply of steel linked to exports, two established British names created cars that they thought would bring in valuable American dollars.
And what's more, designed by teams who remained resolutely English and had probably never even been to America. Austin's Atlantic, a car as American as Dick Van Dyke's Cockney accent was English, but bristling with American influence such as the wonderful signpost light. Triumph's Mayflower,
a miniature Rolls Royce, but with only 38 brake horsepower to pull it along. Americans just loved their Rolls Royces, so Triumph's plan was to produce a pint pot roller for Pittsburgh posers. Ford talk a lot these days about new edge design. Well, Triumph reckoned this modern-day Pilgrim father was razor edge. Features like a lockable bonnet and folding seats are still being copied today. Soon the People's Rolls, complete with styling by Mulliner, was selling well to hard-up ambassadors around the Commonwealth. In fact, 34,000 were sold, quite impressive for its day. But the Americans wanted to climb hills occasionally and cruise their interstate highways. But with a 1200cc side-valve engine, the Mayflower did well to climb steep curbs, let alone the hills of San Francisco. All the ads in the world couldn't disguise the fact that the Mayflower was woefully inadequate compared with the gas guzzlers of the American market. As the ads said, buy a Mayflower, it'll make your house look bigger. But only a paltry 501 were sold there. The Americans preferred cars like this 1949 Pontiac, with an engine nearly 4 litres bigger and enough chrome to plate a whole Mayflower. But at $1,800, it cost only $99 more. Fords and Chevys were even cheaper. I'm afraid that at this stage, stateside victory for Triumph was never going to be more than just a dream. So, where Triumph failed with the Mayflower, could Austin succeed with the Atlantic? At least it looked more American. I'm actually achieving a boyhood ambition. I'm driving an Austin A90 Atlantic. It's marvellous. It was my favourite dinky toy when I was a kid, and look, I've still got it. I thought it was the bee's knees with that centre spotlight and those beautiful bulbous flowing lines. Spurred on by some success selling their Devon in America, Austin came up with this comfortable four-seater, full of American touches like electric windows and even an electrically operated roof. Novelties unthinkable in the austere home market. But never mind the gadgets, would the Americans be convinced? The initial impression is the size of this steering wheel. It's huge, Baker-like covers and the chrome rim in the inside there for the horn. One thing you notice though is the bright red dashboard and the golden dials, a speedometer with 30 miles an hour marked on it very clearly, and a rev counter, a cable-driven one no less. Oh, it's good to drive, but it does wallow a bit, yes. I'm saying it wallows quite a lot. Austin pulled out all the stops to sell the Atlantic across the Atlantic. But it would take more than a few marketing tricks to boost the car's chances. They even hired Indianapolis and succeeded in breaking American endurance records, which has stood for over 20 years. It didn't help that the Atlantic was badly built and expensive to maintain. But when it came down to it, it just wasn't big enough or brash enough to compete with Detroit. And then there was the price. At nearly $4,000, it was twice the cost of our Pontiac here. Even a $1,000 cut left it expensive. And of the 8,000 Atlantics sold, only a measly 350 went to America. The experience of the Mayflower and Atlantic was a bitter lesson for Triumph and Austin. But all was not lost. Americans still had a taste for British sports cars, and both manufacturers found success in the States when they sold cars that weren't trying to be something else.
Subaru. A confusing mark. One minute it's all pumped up in pretzers and Colin McRae. The next, it's jacked up suspension and Farmers Weekly. Now there's a new version of their biggest model, the Legacy. It comes with an improved 2.5-litre engine, the option of computer-controlled suspension, and rally car style 4-wheel drive. And they're launching it first as an estate. An estate? Now, I've never been a farmer myself, but I do like Subarus, and I like them because they're different. They insist on giving all their cars flat-4 boxer engines, a bit like a Porsche. They insist on permanent 4-wheel drive for added traction on all models. And they insist on giving all their cars frameless door windows, so you can pretend you're in a sporty coupe, even during the lambing season. But the main reason I love Subarus is because the pinnacle of all their shameless, frameless flat 4 creativity is the Impreza Turbo. And the Impreza Turbo is one of the best all-round cars in the whole world. But this ain't an Impreza, so can the rally-bred genius of little brother rub off? Well, not to look at, because it's just a subtle evolution of the last legacy. Fortunately, there's more to excite you beneath the neatly discreet skin. Under the bonnet is that wonderfully thrumsome flat 4. Unlike your average 4-cylinder, it won't get shouty however hard you rev it. It always remains smooth and tuneful. And sadly, in this new legacy, you can't hear the engine's fruity rasp because it's too grown up for a blaring special stage soundtrack. And the handling is very mature too. Sackfuls of grip and the balance of a ballerina thanks to that fiendish 4-wheel drive trickery under the floor. Mind you, this wagon isn't meant to be thrown around like a rally car. If you do, your shopping and your sheepdog will form an unsightly union in the boot. Even if you do decide to get Shep a bit shaken up, the Legacy comes with the option of a fancy vehicle dynamics control system, which is as clever as a man with 2 heads. It sends power to the exact wheel that needs it, so that, frankly, you'd have more chance getting into trouble on a night out with Sister Wendy. Subaru ought to know its market, and it wears Wellingtons. It's a very likeable car, this Legacy, and useful too. This boot is so big you could throw a party in there and have somewhere to put the coats. Indeed, you could probably install a roller disco on the spacious back seats. And you can also be pretty sure the Legacy won't let you down. Remember, Subaru came first in last year's Top Gear JD Power survey for customer satisfaction. How sensible. But I thought they were trying to be sporty. It's strangely schizophrenic, this car. There's a sexy shiftgate, but sensible seats. A rally-bred engine, but inbred styling. And I'm not sure who's going to buy it. It's certainly not farmers because, well, it's just too darn civilised. And too expensive as well. This well-kitted automatic with dynamics control and air springs costs near on £25,000. On the other hand, for the same security and solidity, an Audi A4 Quattro would cost £5 more. I do like this car. It's gutsy, grippy, and it's a little bit different. However, in Japan, Subaru will sell you a twin-turbo version, giving 280 brake horsepower. And I have a feeling I'd like that one even more.
Next week, I drive the thoroughly agreeable Mercedes S-Class. Vicky risks all in the long-awaited Rolls-Royce banger race. And here's a reminder of that cut-and-shut hotline number. 0990 333 660.